I'll now make my remarks from the rostrum. Your Excellency, Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency Abdullah Shahid, President-elect of the General Assembly, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, above all, dear colleagues. It is an honor to stand before you and close the 75th session of the UN General Assembly. This past year has been a marvelous journey. Thank you for electing me in an overwhelming democratic vote to join you for this session as the President of the UN General Assembly. I'm privileged to have served alongside you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, as the former Secretary General Kofi Annan said, I quote, "More than ever before in human history, we share a common destiny. We can master it only if we face it together, and that is why we have the United Nations." End quote. This year has been tumultuous, historic, transformative, unequal, challenging, and groundbreaking. From the earliest moments of my presidency, we knew that COVID-19 would dominate our agenda. Since September 2019, reopening the United Nations to conduct our usual business and diplomacy safely was our utmost priority. We're not there yet. But I can say now that COVID-19 has reinforced our belief in a more effective and more responsive United Nations. We started the session in a very different place to where we stand today. In September of last year, the UN was still closed. The General Assembly had postponed meeting after meeting. Vaccines, even credible testing, had yet to be developed. From the start of the session, I felt it was important to stand in solidarity with the 200,000 people working for the United Nations around the world. So many of them work with deep dedication in difficult circumstances. Some pay the ultimate sacrifice and lose their lives in the line of duty, such as Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld and Sergio Vieira de Mello. It was important to demonstrate that the General Assembly was working alongside them during this especially challenging moment in world history. Today, although there are many steps left on the path to recovery, it is safe to say that we know our way. There are vaccines and testing capacities. Borders and economies are opening. Lives are resuming. This is progress. This progress can be felt here at the UN as well. While not yet fully open, we have bit by bit expanded in-person meetings and engagements. Various cafes and eateries have reopened. The space for diplomacy has begun to re-emerge. We started the year limited to one delegate per member state in the General Assembly Hall. Now we are at 1+1. Next week, it will be 1+3 for the general debate. Bilateral booths in the headquarters will also be provided. I'm happy and proud that all high-level and other meetings mandated for the 75th session have been held. We had 105 formal plenary meetings and 16 high-level meetings. We also have concluded a number of important processes postponed from the 74th session. The 6 main committees of the General Assembly successfully concluded their extensive work using hybrid working methods. We adopted more than 120 decisions, 125 in reality, and 328 resolutions. We considered reports of the international tribunals, main organs, and other bodies of the UN system. We conducted in-person meetings and elections, including the reappointment of the Secretary General Antonio Guterres and the election of my successor, Abdullah Shahid. Through hybrid, a combination of in-person and virtual, those from outside New York have been able to join us in the General Assembly Hall on the screens and participate in our discussions. While day-to-day diplomacy has been exceedingly challenging in a virtual environment, together we tried our best to proceed. Together we have demonstrated that leadership matters and solutions are possible, that an inclusive, transparent, and engaged General Assembly must be our priority. I will forever be proud of the work we did to reopen these United Nations. I'm deeply grateful to the member states who put their trust in me to pursue this path despite the doubts of some. There is overwhelming consensus that the pandemic has created a once-in-a-generation opportunity to recover better and stronger, to do better together, to learn and improve. I urge you all to use this momentum as you continue your work in the General Assembly, to ensure the agreements and decisions reached here are turned into real, lasting, and sustained action on the ground, so they truly benefit those they are intended for. Let me also leave you with a quote from Dag Hammarskjöld. Never look down to test the ground before taking your next step. Only he who keeps his eyes fixed on the far horizon will find the right road. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, notwithstanding, there are lessons that I have drawn in pursuit of our collective objective of promoting peace, security, social progress, and better standard of life in larger freedoms. Let me highlight a few. Firstly, there are many international organizations that address crises over the world. However, it is the General Assembly that is the most representative global body. It is the single best platform to mobilize political will and incubate collective solutions to a global crisis. However, we are not using this platform effectively and efficiently. We are constrained by bureaucratic excuses and are sidestepping our responsibility out of a misaligned sense of keeping the peace. As President of the General Assembly, I often have been blunt. You know that. Similarly, I will not hesitate in saying that our words continue to outpace our actions. While words encourage unity, they are simply not enough. The General Assembly and the United Nations must be seen to be acting to address the most critical challenges of our time. Secondly, we must strengthen and unite behind the multilateral system. Our world is increasingly globalized, interconnected, and interdependent. As such, nationalistic solutions will not resolve our challenges. It is my belief that a multilateral strategy may have helped to guard us better against the spread of COVID and its variants and protect those most vulnerable. Despite having the tools available to pursue a multilateral approach, we have pursued a go-it-alone approach. This is unfortunate and has prolonged this pandemic. Let us heed the lessons from this past year. Let us strengthen the multilateral system. Let us put our faith in its ability to support all countries simultaneously. Thirdly, the pandemic has unveiled the depths of global inequality. Put simply, not everyone has the option of working from home. Not everyone struggles with Zoom calls. Many don't even know what Zoom is. Hence, the third lesson. As we move forward, the UN and member states must focus on the gaps that were revealed to us. This must critically include the lingering and ever-widening digital divide. If we wish to achieve Agenda 2030, inequality must be reduced. Fourthly, More must be done to improve gender equality and provide greater protection of the rights of women. I do not wish to discount the progress achieved. Indeed, there is much to celebrate, but let us be honest and clear that our society remains vastly unequal. Women are the first ones to bear the brunt of any challenging circumstances. This was especially visible during my visits to refugee camps on the Syrian-Turkish border, to Cox's Bazar, and to those in small island states affected by hurricanes. Also, there have been sustained reports of increasing domestic violence towards women throughout the pandemic. In recent weeks, we have heard alarming reports of violations against women and girls in Afghanistan, and the hard-won gains risk being lost. Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals will be impossible if we leave half the population behind. My fifth and final lesson: the Sustainable Development Goals represent a blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. Implementing these goals will help to protect us against future catastrophes. With the trajectory we are on, we are going to miss the 2030 deadline. I'm unfortunate to say that. But this Assembly and you, the member states who make up the United Nations, must redouble efforts to implement the SDGs. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, we were able to meet in person to discuss the impact and implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. At the General Assembly's special session on COVID-19, we agreed that frank and informative exchanges were necessary to blunt the growing inequality of impacts within and amongst countries. I only hope that this session has helped to boost support for multilateral efforts to combat the disease and has encouraged cooperation and collaboration amongst states. In a bid to streamline the work of the United Nations principal organs and ensure mutually reinforcing efforts, I held monthly coordination meetings with combined bi-monthly trilateral meeting with the President of the Security Council and the Secretary General. I also frequently met with the President of the Economic and Social Council to ensure our efforts were aligned. Following a technical rollover last year, the Assembly agreed a strong consensus resolution on the revitalization of the General Assembly. We achieved progress on some important issues, including the decisions to move the start of the General Assembly forward 1 week and to by-analyze the resolution, a strong message example from the HWG to the main committees on the need to reduce the number of resolutions. Since the beginning of my presidency, I committed to strengthening the intergovernmental negotiations, IGN, on Security Council reform, and I worked to overcome the difficulties that were experienced last session due to COVID-19. IGN remains one of the most important processes. It is critical that efforts at reform remain member state-driven. I know and we witness that differences exist, but in differences of views and perspectives lie progress. Excellencies, dear colleagues, throughout my presidency, I have tried to bring greater focus to countries in special situations. I established a board of advisors on LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS to highlight the specific challenges they face. This platform has been exceedingly valuable in generating a new way of collaborating at the political level within the United Nations. Recognizing the usefulness of this group wishes to forge a common agenda and strengthen coordination within the three set of countries. Building on that request, I propose that the President-elect Shahid considers convening a high-level meeting on LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS in the coming year. As a gender champion, I also established Gender Advisory Group to promote gender equality and women's empowerment within the General Assembly's work. To me, this was critical, given the disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the lives of women and girls. Here at the United Nations, we must uphold and emulate the ideals we advocate for. In that regard, I'm pleased by the election of an all-female bureau of the Second Committee for the 76th session, as well as the gender balance in election of the chairpersons of the main committees. I encourage member states to continue to put women candidates forward until we achieve full gender balance in all elected positions in the organizations. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, while I'm proud of our high level of cooperation and coordination, the scale and evolving complexity of the challenges before us require changes to be made to this organization. In that regard, allow me to present some recommendations. Firstly, the General Assembly must be strengthened. This body is critical to the success of multilateralism. As an outsider, I have seen progress, but frankly, it is too little and too late. Various reform processes are overburdened with a plethora of issues. There is a lack of political will to move ahead. We need to take a relook at these processes. We must prioritize and ensure we equip this Assembly and the UN with tools required to meet the 21st century challenges. We must get ahead of the curve. There are far too many examples of the UN following the crisis, instead of being ahead of it. We have to ask ourselves why. This undisputedly demonstrates that the UN's preventive diplomacy tools are either not being utilized or they are not fit for purpose and need to be refurbished. Relatedly, and as my second point, the Office of the President of the General Assembly needs your urgent attention. It must be further institutionalized and supported. There's a serious mismatch in the way this organization treats its employees and the world's highest political office. Delays and inefficiencies resulting from a lack of staff and insufficient resources for this office are not acceptable. An enhanced cadre of professionals is needed to run this office and maintain institutional memory. An effective political administration should be a priority for all members of this Assembly. I have made a set of recommendations to strengthen the Office of the President of the General Assembly in my handover report, and I hope that my brother, President-elect Shahid, will take these forward. My third recommendation is on substance. This session, I have observed that too much of our work is focused on procedures at the cost of substance. Nowhere is this more visible than the General Assembly-led high-level meetings, for which we liberally develop mandates and call every high-level meeting leads to results or is needed. Many of these engagements are poorly attended. We must continue to make efforts to restrict the number of high-level and mandated meetings during any given session. Quantity should not supersede quality. If we call a meeting a high-level meeting, then we must ensure that there is, in fact, high-level engagement. And this necessitates a much more streamlined, priority-driven agenda. Fourth point, the focus on the most vulnerable must be strengthened. The General Assembly must continue to give a voice to those most in need. As I've seen on my trips to Syrian refugee camps, Rohingya Muslim camps in Cox's Bazar, and the volcano and hurricane-affected areas of the Caribbean, there is a deep respect for the United Nations flag. Wherever I have traveled in the world, the UN flag has been applauded. It evocates feelings of respect, of integrity, of progress. The world sees the UN as a single entity. They expect the General Assembly as the most democratic body to be their voice and deliberate on their behalf. This, above all else, must be our priority. And finally, there must be strengthened cooperation with the UN Security Council. These two bodies are like limbs of the same being. If they work together, they can reach great distances. If they pull in opposite directions, they risk tearing this organization apart. There are synergies between the General Assembly and Security Council that are not currently being exploited. Take, for example, the General Assembly's work on Myanmar, Syria, and Palestine, which supported that of the Security Council. The General Assembly cannot be reduced to a talking shop or merely focused on normative guidance of development agenda. As the UN's most representative body, it must consider the most pressing political issues. The General Assembly must strengthen all the available tools at its disposal to address the key issues facing our planet and species. Excellencies, dear colleagues, it has been an honor as a citizen of one of the founding states of the United Nations to hold this office. I thank the President of Turkey, His Excellency Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, and Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu for nominating me to this important post and their strong support throughout my tenure. I want to pay my particular thanks to Antonio Guterres, our Secretary General. His support was crucial to my work and this session. Dear Antonio, I thank you very much from the heart. I thank your team, Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, and your Executive Office for cooperation, despite very challenging times that we collectively faced. I wish you a successful tenure ahead. I would like to recognize the governments that provided support to the Trust Fund and secondees to staff my office. The staff of Office of the President of the General Assembly, so ably led by Ambassador Tegan Brink and Ambassador Faruk Han, was critical to the smooth running of the UN's most representative body. I am grateful to all those who have served with me this year. I thank the Western European and others group states for their support and endorsing my nomination with consensus. I would be remiss if I don't thank the Turkish Foreign Ministry for giving me the services of its two sterling diplomats, Ms. Ceren Özgür and Mr. Öncü Keçeli. They were the backbone and pillars of my senior cabinet. I am deeply grateful to the entire staff of the Secretariat, who ensure this Assembly functions efficiently and effectively every day. The Department for General Assembly and Conference Management, the Department for Global Communications, and the Department of Safety and Security for their dedication and distinction. I also wish to pay tribute to all the exceptionally brave people who work for the United Nations the world over. I have been inspired by your dedication and commitment to the multilateral system, and I have been honored to serve alongside you. I wish His Excellency President-elect Shahid, my brother, a fruitful and impactful 76th session. There are certainly many challenges ahead, but my brother Abdullah has my full support. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I left you to the end. I was trying for weeks to find a way to thank you and the member states for all the support you have shown me, a way which could truly reflect my heartfelt feelings. Then one day, I heard a song playing. It was sung by one of the best artists and singers ever, Miss Bette Midler, and produced by Mr. Arif Mardin, a Turkish musician with many Grammy Awards and platinum records. I immediately understood that it was what I was looking for. So let me end with the title of that song. I could fly higher than an eagle, for you were the wind beneath my wings. Flight high against the sky, so high that I almost touched the sky, for you were the wind beneath my wings. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.